When Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Diesel Morrison made that bet, he thought he was teaching a lesson about military reality. The young woman standing before him at the Naval Special Warfare training facility looked determined but untested. Hell Week had broken seasoned warriors, left grown men crying for their mothers, and sent countless hopefuls packing after just hours of punishment. No way this college graduate could handle 5 days of pure torture designed to weed out all but the most elite fighters. Morrison had survived 3 Hell Week experiences himself and seen hundreds of recruits fail. What he didn't know was that Sarah Chen had been preparing for this moment her entire life, carrying secrets that would fuel her through pain beyond imagination. But here's what nobody saw coming, including Chen herself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds soaking wet. At 24, she possessed an engineering degree from MIT and spoke 3 languages fluently. What the grizzled instructors at the Naval Special Warfare Center couldn't see was the steel backbone forged by years of loss and determination that ran through her slender frame like rebar through concrete. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Michael Chen, had died in Afghanistan when Sarah was 16. Before his final deployment, he'd spent countless hours teaching her survival skills, military tactics, and the mental fortitude that separated warriors from ordinary people. Hidden in her gear bag, wrapped carefully in waterproof plastic, lay his Medal of Honor, the highest decoration her country could bestow, earned posthumously for actions that saved his entire squad. Master Chief Morrison represented everything Sarah had been fighting against her entire adult life. At 48, he stood 6 feet 4 inches of pure muscle and scar tissue, with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could rattle windows 3 buildings away. His reputation preceded him through every corridor of the base. 3 Hell Week completions as a trainee, 15 years as an instructor, and a kill count in overseas operations that remained classified. The man was a living legend, and he knew it. The Naval Special Warfare training facility sprawled across 200 acres of California coastline, where the Pacific Ocean provided a brutal natural gymnasium for testing human limits. Concrete barracks housed trainees in Spartan conditions designed to strip away civilian comfort. The obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and training pools had been engineered by decades of military minds to separate the elite from the merely ambitious. Sarah's presence here resulted from a new Department of Defense initiative allowing civilian contractors' children to participate in military training programs. The policy aimed to build stronger relationships between military and civilian defense communities. What bureaucrats in Washington hadn't anticipated was someone like Sarah actually taking the program seriously enough to attempt Hell Week. Morrison had seen the directive cross his desk 6 months earlier and laughed out loud. Civilians playing soldier, he'd called it. A waste of resources and time that would end with some politician's kid getting hurt and lawsuits flying. When Sarah's application arrived, he'd barely glanced at it before approving her participation, assuming she'd wash out during the first week of preparatory training. But Sarah hadn't washed out. For 3 months, she'd endured every preliminary exercise, conditioning program, and mental evaluation the instructors could devise. She'd run every mile, completed every push-up, and absorbed every lesson with quiet intensity that reminded some of the older instructors of their most dedicated recruits. The other trainees, 23 young men from various military branches, had initially treated Sarah's presence as a curious novelty. Some tried flirting, others made jokes, but most simply ignored her, assuming she'd disappear soon enough. As weeks passed and Sarah continued matching their performance, the jokes became fewer and the respect grudgingly increased. Morrison watched it all with professional detachment tinged by personal skepticism. He'd seen thousands of recruits over his career, and experience had taught him to spot quitters early. Sarah possessed obvious intelligence and surprising physical conditioning, but Hell Week wasn't about intelligence or fitness. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be measured or taught, the absolute refusal to quit when every fiber of your being screamed for mercy. The bet had started innocently enough during a Friday evening instructor meeting. Morrison was reviewing the upcoming Hell Week class roster when Lieutenant Commander Brooks mentioned Sarah's consistent performance. She might actually make it through, Brooks had suggested, more thinking out loud than making a serious prediction. Morrison's laugh had been immediate and dismissive. A civilian college girl surviving Hell Week? Brooks, I'll bet you a month's pay she doesn't last 48 hours. Word of the wager spread through the instructor corps like wildfire. Some sided with Morrison's experience and skepticism. Others, younger instructors who'd worked more closely with Sarah during preparation, weren't so certain. The bet officially became Morrison's challenge coin, a worn Special Warfare medallion he'd carried through 3 combat deployments, against Lieutenant Commander Brooks' month of base duty assignments. Sarah learned about the bet from another trainee on Sunday evening, the night before Hell Week began. Her reaction surprised everyone who witnessed it. She simply nodded once and returned to studying her training materials. No anger, no hurt feelings, no dramatic declarations. Just quiet acceptance that she'd have to prove herself to men who'd already decided she would fail. That night, as Sarah cleaned and organized her gear for the 5th time, she touched the hidden Medal of Honor and whispered words her father had taught her years earlier. Warriors aren't born, sweetheart. They're forged in moments when quitting seems like the only sane option. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. At 0400 hours, air horns shattered the pre-dawn silence as instructors stormed through the barracks, screaming orders and overturning bunks. Hell Week had officially begun, and Morrison's bet was about to be tested against 5 days of calculated brutality. The training schedule posted on the barracks wall had become Sarah's roadmap over the past weeks. She'd memorized every event, every timeline, every requirement until the information was burned into her consciousness. While other trainees focused on individual challenges, Sarah studied the entire week as a strategic campaign requiring careful resource management and tactical thinking. Morrison stood in the assembly area watching 24 trainees line up in the pre-dawn darkness. 23 men and 1 woman, all about to discover what their bodies and minds could endure when pushed beyond rational limits. The instructors had planned every minute of the next 5 days to systematically break down anyone lacking the absolute commitment required for special operations. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison's voice carried across the silent ranks, welcome to Hell Week. Over the next 120 hours, you will discover whether you possess the intestinal fortitude to earn the right to continue in this program. Statistics suggest that 75% of you will quit before Wednesday morning. I personally believe that number will be higher this year. His eyes found Sarah in the formation, standing at attention with military bearing that would have made her father proud. Morrison continued, some of you are here because you think this will look good on a resume. Others believe you're proving something to yourselves or your families. Let me be clear. Hell Week doesn't care about your motivations. It only cares about one thing. Do you quit or do you continue? The first event was a baseline physical fitness test designed to establish each trainee's starting condition. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a 4-mile run in full gear. Sarah had been preparing for this moment since her father's death 8 years earlier. Every morning run, every gym session, every moment of discipline had been building toward proving she belonged among warriors. Trainee Martinez, a Marine from Texas, leaned over during equipment preparation. You sure about this, Chen? It's not too late to walk away with your dignity intact. Sarah checked her gear methodically, the same routine her father had taught her. Martinez, my dignity isn't tied to other people's expectations. It's tied to whether I give my absolute best effort when it matters most. The physical fitness test results surprised several instructors. Sarah finished 3rd overall in the push-up event, 2nd in sit-ups, and 5th in the 4-mile run. Her pull-up performance matched the minimum male standards exactly. Morrison watched the results with growing unease. The numbers suggested Sarah might last longer than his confident prediction of 48 hours. During the brief rest period between events, Lieutenant Commander Brooks approached Morrison with barely concealed satisfaction. Still feeling confident about that bet, Master Chief? Morrison's jaw tightened. Brooks, 1 morning of physical fitness tests doesn't predict Hell Week survival. Wait until we get to surf torture, log carries, and sleep deprivation. That's when the real quitting begins. But privately, Morrison felt the first crack in his certainty. Sarah's performance wasn't just adequate, It was impressive. More concerning was her demeanor. While other trainees showed signs of nervousness or bravado, Sarah maintained calm focus that reminded Morrison of seasoned operators preparing for actual combat missions. The afternoon brought team-building exercises designed to identify natural leaders and expose personality conflicts that would intensify under stress. Trainees were divided into boat crews of 6 members each, with Sarah assigned to boat crew 3 along with Martinez, Johnson from Alabama, Williams from Chicago, Thompson from Oregon, and Davis from New York. Initial skepticism from her boat crew members evaporated quickly when Sarah demonstrated practical knowledge of rope work, knot tying, and equipment maintenance that exceeded several of her teammates. Her engineering background provided analytical approaches to problems that brute force couldn't solve. "Where'd you learn to tie a bowline that fast?" Johnson asked, genuinely impressed. "My father taught me," Sarah replied simply. He said proper equipment maintenance could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. Morrison observed the interaction from across the training area. Sarah wasn't trying to prove herself through dramatic gestures or confrontational behavior. Instead, she was quietly demonstrating competence and earning respect through performance. It was, Morrison had to admit, exactly how he'd taught his own trainees to conduct themselves. As evening approached and the first day of Hell Week neared its end, Morrison reviewed his bet with growing uncertainty. The woman he'd dismissed as a civilian playing soldier was displaying military bearing and tactical thinking that impressed even experienced instructors. Tomorrow would bring greater challenges, but Sarah Chen had already lasted longer than Morrison's initial predictions suggested possible. Tuesday began at 0300 with ice-cold water flooding the barracks and instructors screaming commands that would have made drill sergeants jealous. Sleep had been a luxury none of the trainees experienced for more than 2 hours at a stretch. This was intentional. Hell Week was designed to test performance under extreme fatigue when rational thought became nearly impossible. Sarah's waterproof journal lay hidden in her gear, filled with her father's combat lessons transcribed from memory. During brief moments between exercises, she would mentally review his teachings about surviving extreme conditions. "Pain is temporary," he'd told her. "Quitting is permanent. When your body wants to stop, your mind must take command." The morning's first event was surf torture, a euphemistic name for what amounted to organized hypothermia. Trainees linked arms and sat in the frigid Pacific Ocean while waves crashed over their heads for 20-minute intervals. The water temperature hovered around 58 degrees, cold enough to sap body heat within minutes and trigger uncontrollable shivering that made simple tasks nearly impossible. Morrison stood on the beach watching his trainees endure the systematic assault on their core body temperature. This exercise typically claimed the first casualties of Hell Week. Strong men who dominated physical fitness tests would suddenly discover that mental toughness couldn't overcome basic physiology when hypothermia set in. Sarah's boat crew entered the surf as a unit, arms linked, faces grim with determination. The first wave hit like a sledgehammer of liquid ice, driving breath from their lungs and shocking their nervous systems. By the third wave, several trainees were already showing signs of distress. By the fifth wave, trainee Henderson from Boat Crew 2 was pulled from the water by medical personnel. "Time!" Morrison called after what felt like hours but had been exactly 20 minutes. The trainees stumbled from the surf, their movements clumsy and uncontrolled. Sarah's lips had turned blue and her hands shook violently, but she maintained formation discipline and helped support teammates who were struggling more severely. Morrison noted her behavior with grudging respect. She was thinking about her team even while her own body was shutting down from cold. Medical personnel checked each trainee for signs of dangerous hypothermia. Sarah's core temperature had dropped to concerning levels, but she remained within acceptable parameters. More importantly, she showed no signs of the psychological breakdown that often accompanied severe cold exposure. During the brief warming period, trainees wrapped in emergency blankets and forced to drink hot liquids. Sarah used techniques her father had taught her about maintaining mental focus during physical distress. She visualized warm places, controlled her breathing, and refused to let her mind dwell on the discomfort. "You okay, Chen?" Martinez asked through chattering teeth. "Just getting started," Sarah replied. though her voice carried the strain of someone fighting their body's natural responses. The second surf torture session came 90 minutes later. This time, trainees Wilson and Foster didn't make it through the full 20 minutes. Medical personnel pulled them from the water when their core temperatures dropped to dangerous levels. The class was down to 21 members before noon on the second day. Morrison watched Sarah emerge from her second hypothermic ordeal with growing amazement. She was clearly suffering. Her entire body shook uncontrollably and her skin had taken on the pale, waxy appearance of severe cold exposure. But her eyes remained focused and alert, scanning her teammates to assess their condition before worrying about her own. Master Chief, Lieutenant Commander Brooks approached during the afternoon equipment preparation period. Your civilian college girl is outperforming half the military trainees. Morrison's jaw tightened. It's early yet, Brooks. Wait until the sleep deprivation really kicks in and the physical exhaustion accumulates. That's when people break. But privately, Morrison was beginning to question his assumptions. Sarah's performance wasn't just about physical conditioning or mental preparation. She demonstrated something harder to define, an acceptance of suffering that allowed her to function effectively while her body screamed for relief. The afternoon brought log carries. Teams of 6 trainees carrying 200-pound telephone poles over obstacle courses, while instructors shouted criticism and additional challenges. Sarah's boat crew struggled initially to coordinate their movements, but her analytical approach to the problem helped them develop techniques that made the exercise manageable. Physics, she explained during a brief rest. We're fighting the leverage wrong. If we adjust our hand positions and synchronize our steps, the log becomes easier to control. Her teammates implemented her suggestions and immediately noticed improvement. Morrison observed this leadership moment with conflicted feelings. Sarah was proving herself not just as an individual performer but as someone who made her entire team more effective. As Tuesday evening approached, Hell Week had claimed 3 casualties and left the remaining trainees exhausted, cold, and beginning to doubt their ability to continue. Sarah Chen, the civilian college girl that Morrison had bet couldn't last 48 hours, was not only surviving but quietly emerging as one of the strongest performers in the class. Wednesday morning brought the exercise that had ended more Hell Week dreams than any other. Extended surf torture followed immediately by the obstacle course. The combination of hypothermia and physical exhaustion created a perfect storm that separated those with unbreakable will from those who simply thought they possessed it. Sarah's core temperature had never fully recovered from Tuesday's sessions. She'd spent the night shivering in her sleeping bag, unable to achieve the deep sleep her body desperately needed. Around her, teammates groaned and shifted restlessly, their bodies fighting the accumulated damage of 2 days in hell. At 0245, air horns shattered what little rest they'd managed. Instructors flooded the barracks with ice water and screaming commands. 3 more trainees quit during the wake-up process, unable to face another day of systematic torture. The class was down to 18 members, and the real breaking point hadn't even begun. Morrison stood on the beach as dawn broke gray and cold over the Pacific. Fog rolled in from the ocean, reducing visibility and adding an element of psychological isolation to the physical challenges ahead. Today's surf torture would last 45 minutes, more than double the previous sessions, followed immediately by a timed obstacle course run. This is where we separate the warriors from the wannabes, Morrison announced to his remaining trainees. 45 minutes in the surf, then straight to the obstacle course. No rest, no recovery time. Your body will be hypothermic, your muscles will be cramping, and your brain will be screaming at you to quit. That's when we discover who you really are. Sarah's boat crew entered the surf as the fog thickened around them. The water felt even colder than previous sessions, if such a thing were possible. Within minutes, the familiar burning sensation of hypothermia began its assault on her nervous system. By 10 minutes, her hands were numb claws that could barely maintain grip on her teammates' arms. Trainee Davis, the tough kid from New York, started showing severe distress at the 20-minute mark. His breathing became irregular and his movements uncoordinated. Sarah and Martinez supported him between them, using their own body heat to help keep him conscious. I can't feel my legs, Davis whispered through blue lips. Stay with us, Sarah replied, her own voice barely controlled. Focus on breathing. Count waves. Don't think about time. At 30 minutes, 2 more trainees were pulled from the water by medical personnel. At 35 minutes, Davis collapsed completely. Medical staff rushed into the surf to extract him, leaving Sarah's boat crew down to 5 members for the final 10 minutes. Morrison watched Sarah during those final minutes with something approaching awe. Her entire body convulsed with uncontrollable shivering. Her skin had taken on the gray pallor of severe hypothermia, and her movements had become clumsy and uncoordinated. But her eyes remained focused and determined, never showing the glazed look that indicated mental surrender. Time! Morrison called after an eternity. The surviving trainees stumbled from the surf like refugees from a shipwreck. Emergency blankets were distributed, but there was no time for proper rewarming. The obstacle course waited immediately, and the clock was already running. Sarah's first attempt at the rope climb ended in failure when her numb hands couldn't maintain grip. Her second attempt succeeded only through pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Each obstacle became a separate battle between her hypothermic body and her uncompromising will. The wall climb nearly ended her Hell Week journey. Halfway up the 12-foot barrier, muscle cramps hit her legs like lightning bolts. She hung motionless for several seconds, her body shutting down from cold and exhaustion. Morrison found himself unconsciously leaning forward, willing her to continue. "Move, Chan!" he shouted. Though his tone carried encouragement rather than criticism, Sarah's response came from somewhere deeper than physical strength. She hauled herself over the wall through sheer determination and collapsed on the far side, gasping but still in the fight. Her obstacle course time was poor by normal standards but miraculous given her condition. Medical personnel immediately surrounded her at the finish line. Her core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, and protocol required immediate intervention. The hypothermia blanket wrapped around her shoulders became a symbol of survival rather than surrender. Emergency gear that kept her in the fight when her body wanted to quit. "Ma'am, we need to warm you up gradually," the corpsman explained, checking her pulse and pupil response. Sarah nodded weakly but remained conscious and alert. Around her, other trainees were being evaluated, and 3 more were withdrawn from the program. Wednesday's breaking point had claimed 6 casualties total, leaving just 12 trainees from the original 24. Morrison approached during her medical evaluation, his expression unreadable. "Chen," he said quietly, "that was either the dumbest or the most courageous thing I've seen in 15 years of running Hell Week." Sarah looked up at him through the hypothermia blanket, her voice barely above a whisper but steady. "Master Chief, courage and stupidity often look identical until you know how the story ends." Thursday arrived without fanfare, bringing with it the most insidious challenge of Hell Week: total sleep deprivation. The human mind, deprived of rest for over 72 hours, begins to fracture in predictable ways. Hallucinations become common, decision-making deteriorates, and emotional control crumbles. This was when the strongest bodies often harbored the weakest resolve. Sarah had managed perhaps 6 hours of sleep since Monday morning. Her family photo, now torn and water-stained from the relentless training, remained tucked in her gear as a tangible reminder of why surrender wasn't an option. The image showed her parents and younger brother at a family barbecue, all smiles and suburban normalcy that felt like another lifetime. The remaining 12 trainees moved through the morning like zombies, their coordination shot and their reactions dangerously slow. 2 more had quit during the night, simply walking away from their sleeping areas and heading to the bell that signified voluntary withdrawal. No dramatic announcements, no emotional breakdowns, just the quiet recognition that they'd reached their absolute limit. Morrison observed his survivors with professional concern. Sleep deprivation created genuine safety hazards, and he'd seen trainees seriously injured when exhaustion overcame basic survival instincts. Sarah worried him most because she'd been pushing harder than anyone else, compensating for her smaller size with relentless determination that might blind her to her own limitations. The morning's challenge was mental rather than purely physical. Navigation exercises requiring complex calculations while operating on minimal sleep. Trainees had to plot courses using compass readings, map coordinates, and time-distance calculations, exactly the kind of cognitive tasks that became nearly impossible when the brain was running on fumes. Sarah discovered that her engineering background provided unexpected advantages. Mathematical concepts that defeated exhausted minds came more naturally to her, even in her current state. While other trainees struggled with basic calculations, she moved through the navigation problems with methodical precision that impressed the evaluating instructors. "How are you still thinking clearly?" Martinez asked during a brief rest period. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands shook from exhaustion. "My father taught me mental exercises for staying focused when tired," Sarah replied, though her own voice carried the strain of extreme fatigue. "You create mental compartments. Put the tiredness in one box, the pain in another, and keep the mission in a third box that stays clean and focused." She demonstrated breathing techniques her father had learned during his own military service, sharing knowledge that helped her remaining teammates maintain some level of cognitive function. Morrison watched this instruction session with grudging admiration. Even in her exhausted state, Sarah was thinking about team performance rather than individual survival. The afternoon brought the exercise Morrison had been dreading: weapons training with live ammunition while severely sleep-deprived. Safety protocols were tripled, and medical personnel remained on high alert. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and the training exercise could become a tragedy. Sarah's marksmanship scores surprised everyone, including herself. Despite hands that trembled from exhaustion and eyes that burned from lack of sleep, she maintained steady accuracy that placed her second overall in the group. Her father's training had included extensive firearms instruction, and muscle memory preserved through years of practice carried her through when conscious thought became unreliable. "Outstanding shooting, Chen," the range instructor commented as he reviewed her target. "You've been practicing." "Since I was 12, sir," Sarah replied, remembering weekend trips to the gun range with her father, learning respect for weapons and precision in their use. As Thursday evening approached, the psychological pressure intensified. Instructors employed deliberate harassment techniques designed to break down emotional barriers and expose personality flaws that could prove dangerous in actual combat situations. They screamed criticism, assigned impossible tasks, and created scenarios where failure seemed inevitable. Sarah endured the verbal assault with the same methodical approach she'd applied to physical challenges. Her father had prepared her for this too, explaining how military training deliberately broke down civilian thinking patterns to rebuild them according to warrior principles. Understanding the purpose behind the abuse helped her maintain psychological distance from the attacks. 2 more trainees quit during the evening harassment sessions, unable to handle the combination of sleep deprivation and psychological pressure. The class was down to 10 members, and Morrison could see cracks forming in several. Others, even the strongest, were beginning to show signs of impending breakdown. But Sarah Chen, the civilian college girl he'd bet couldn't last 48 hours, was still standing. More than standing, she was quietly becoming a stabilizing influence on the entire remaining group. Her calm responses to instructor harassment and her willingness to help struggling teammates had earned respect that transcended initial skepticism about her presence. Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of hoping his own bet would fail. Sarah's performance was rewriting his assumptions about what defined a warrior, and her potential success was forcing him to question beliefs he'd held for decades. Friday morning brought the boat races, a Hell Week tradition that combined teamwork, strategy, and raw determination in equal measure. Each boat crew would navigate a treacherous course through surf and around buoys, carrying their 200-pound inflatable boat overhead when required, racing against other teams while instructors created additional obstacles and complications. Sarah's reduced boat crew now consisted of only 4 members after Davis's medical withdrawal and Thompson's decision to quit during Thursday night's psychological pressure sessions. Martinez, Johnson, Williams, and Sarah herself represented different military branches and backgrounds, but exhaustion had forged them into a surprisingly cohesive unit. The winning boat paddle, signed by victorious teams from previous Hell Week classes, hung in the instructor's building as a symbol of tactical excellence under extreme duress. Sarah had studied the strategies used by previous winners, applying her engineering mindset to analyze optimal approaches for the challenging course. Morrison explained the rules with characteristic directness. For boat crews, one race, winner takes all. The winning crew gets hot meals and 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Everyone else gets cold rations and whatever rest they can steal between continuing exercises. The stakes couldn't have been higher for exhausted trainees operating on fumes. 4 hours of real sleep could mean the difference between finishing Hell Week and collapsing before the final challenges. Sarah gathered her boat crew for strategic planning while other teams focused on psyching themselves up with aggressive rhetoric. Her approach was methodical, almost academic, as she sketched the race course in the sand and analyzed optimal approaches for each segment. The surf launch is where most teams lose valuable time, she explained, drawing lines with a stick. If we coordinate our paddle strokes and use the wave timing I've been observing, we can gain 30 seconds right at the start. Martinez looked skeptical. Chen, this isn't a physics problem. It's about who wants it more. It's about both, Sarah replied calmly. Heart gets you in the race, but brain wins it. My father always said that superior tactics beat superior strength when both sides want victory equally. Her teammates had learned to trust Sarah's analytical approach over the past 4 days. Her solutions consistently worked better than brute force methods, and her calm demeanor under pressure had kept them functioning when other boat crews dissolved into arguments and recriminations. The race began with a mad scramble through crashing surf, boat crews fighting waves and each other for early positioning. Sarah's predicted wave timing proved accurate. Her crew caught a perfect wave sequence that carried them ahead of the field before the first turn marker. Morrison watched from the beach with growing amazement. Sarah's boat crew moved with mechanical precision, their paddle strokes synchronized and their boat positioning optimal for each segment of the course. While other teams fought the water, Sarah's crew worked with it, using currents and wave patterns to maintain their early lead. How is she doing that? Lieutenant Commander Brooks asked, standing beside Morrison as the boats rounded the far buoy. She's thinking like a tactician instead of just an athlete, Morrison replied, his professional admiration overriding personal prejudices. Look at their boat angle on that turn. They're using the current to maintain speed while the others are fighting it. The overhead carry segment typically separated winners from losers. Crews had to lift their boats above their heads and run 200 yards across soft sand while maintaining formation. Sarah's crew had discussed this challenge extensively, developing a rotation system that allowed them to maintain pace while managing individual fatigue. Other boat crews struggled with coordination as exhausted minds failed to synchronize movements. Boats were dropped, arguments erupted, and precious seconds ticked away. Sarah's crew executed their rotation flawlessly, actually extending their lead during what was traditionally the most difficult segment. The final sprint to the beach became a rout. Sarah's boat crew crossed the finish line 37 seconds ahead of their nearest competitor, collapsing in the surf with the satisfaction of tactical victory achieved through preparation and teamwork. Morrison approached the winning crew as they celebrated with quiet satisfaction rather than dramatic displays. Sarah lay on her back in the sand, staring at the sky with an expression of serene accomplishment. Outstanding tactics, Chen, Morrison admitted, his voice carrying respect he'd never expected to feel. Where did you learn to analyze water conditions like that? Sarah sat up slowly, sand in her hair and salt water dripping from her gear. My father taught me that every environment has patterns. You can fight them and exhaust yourself, or you can study them and make them work for you. The winning paddle would be signed by her boat crew and added to the tradition, representing not just victory, but the principle that intelligence and preparation could triumph over raw aggression. Sarah Chen had proven that warfare evolved beyond traditional expectations when smart fighters brought new approaches to old challenges. Friday night marked the beginning of Hell Week's final phase, and Morrison found himself alone in his quarters, staring at pages of his personal war diary that he hadn't opened in months. The leather-bound journal contained reflections from 3 decades of military service, including his own Hell Week experiences and observations from 15 years of breaking down and building up future warriors. Tonight's entry would be different. Tonight, he was questioning fundamental beliefs about what made a warrior. Morrison's pen moved slowly across the page as he wrote, Day 4 observations. Trainee Chen continues to exceed all predictions. Her performance isn't just adequate, it's exemplary. More troubling for my own assumptions, she's demonstrating leadership qualities that are making the entire remaining class more effective. He paused, remembering his own Hell Week 30 years earlier. He'd been 23, convinced that raw aggression and refusal to quit were the only qualities that mattered. The instructors had broken him down systematically, just as he now broke down his own trainees, rebuilding his identity around concepts of masculine toughness and physical dominance. Sarah Chen didn't fit those models, yet she was outperforming trainees who embodied everything Morrison had believed defined warrior potential. Her success was forcing him to confront uncomfortable questions about whether his own prejudices had blinded him to different but equally valid expressions of military excellence. The diary entry continued. Chen's approach is fundamentally different from traditional military mindset. Where we teach aggressive dominance, she demonstrates intelligent adaptation. Where we emphasize individual toughness, she focuses on team effectiveness. The results speak for themselves. Her boat crew won today's race through tactical superiority rather than brute force. Morrison closed the journal and walked to his window, looking out over the training facility where 10 exhausted trainees were attempting to rest before tomorrow's final challenges. Somewhere in those barracks, Sarah Chen was probably reviewing her gear and mentally preparing for whatever tests remained, just as he'd done decades earlier in the same place. The uncomfortable truth was that Morrison had begun rooting for Sarah's success, even though it meant losing his bet and admitting his initial assessment had been completely wrong. Watching her navigate each challenge with quiet competence had triggered something he hadn't expected: professional pride in training someone who might actually surpass his own achievements. His military career had been built on clear, simple principles. The strongest survive, the weak get eliminated, and success comes through unwavering aggression. Sarah's performance suggested that modern warfare might require more nuanced approaches, and that the future belonged to those who could combine traditional toughness with adaptive intelligence. Morrison returned to his diary. Personal reflection. I realize I've been measuring Chen against standards developed for a different era of warfare. Today's conflicts require operators who can think strategically while performing physically, who can lead through competence rather than intimidation, and who can adapt tactics to changing circumstances rather than simply applying overwhelming force. The thought process was painful because it implied that his own methods, successful for decades, might be incomplete preparations for future challenges. Sarah wasn't just surviving Hell Week. She was demonstrating that alternative approaches could be equally effective, perhaps more so in certain situations. A knock at his door interrupted Morrison's introspection. Lieutenant Commander Brooks entered with a concerned expression. Master Chief, we need to discuss Chen's medical status. She's showing signs of severe exhaustion, but her performance remains strong. Medical wants to know if we should intervene preventively. Morrison considered the question carefully. Protocol suggested erring on the side of caution with civilian participants, but Sarah had earned the right to make her own decisions about continuing. What's her current condition compared to the military trainees? Morrison asked. Better than most, actually. Her vital signs are stable, and she's maintaining cognitive function better than several others who were not considering pulling. Morrison nodded. Then she continues unless she asks to stop or medical determines she's in genuine danger. She's earned equal treatment. After Brooks left, Morrison returned to his diary for a final entry. Tomorrow Sarah Chen will either complete Hell Week or reach her breaking point. Either outcome will have proven something important about the evolution of military training. If she succeeds, it validates new approaches to warrior development. If she fails, it will be after demonstrating capabilities that exceeded my expectations and challenged my assumptions. He closed the journal and prepared for what might be the most significant day of his instructing career. Sarah Chen had already won something more valuable than his bet. She'd won his respect and forced him to grow as a leader. Tomorrow would determine whether she could complete the transformation from civilian to warrior, but she'd already transformed Morrison's understanding of what that transformation could look like. Saturday morning arrived with the brutal finality of Hell Week's climactic challenges. Only 8 trainees remained from the original 24, their bodies pushed beyond normal human limits, their minds operating in survival mode that transcended rational thought. The obstacle course that had seemed merely difficult on Monday now loomed like an insurmountable mountain of pain and determination. Sarah's climbing rope, modified with additional knots using techniques her father had taught her from his Marine experience, had become her secret weapon for vertical challenges. The extra knots provided better grip points and reduced the upper body strength required for rope climbs, compensating for her smaller size through applied engineering principles. Morrison gathered the survivors for final instructions, his voice carrying a different tone than the harsh criticism of earlier days. These 8 had earned something beyond his respect. They'd proven themselves worthy of honest evaluation rather than motivational harassment. Ladies and gentlemen, you've reached the final phase of Hell Week. Today's obstacle course represents the culmination of everything you've learned about yourselves over the past 5 days. Some of you will complete it within the time standards required for program continuation. Others will discover that excellence has limits, and there's no shame in reaching yours. The obstacle course had been modified for Hell Week's final test, incorporating elements that required not just individual performance but team cooperation. Sarah studied the layout with analytical intensity, noting where her engineering background might provide tactical advantages and where pure determination would have to suffice. The first obstacle was a wall climb requiring rope assistance from teammates. Sarah's modified climbing rope and her knot-tying expertise immediately proved valuable as she helped establish efficient systems for the entire group. While other trainees struggled with standard techniques, Sarah's innovations reduced completion times and conserved energy for later challenges. Martinez, now functioning as informal leader of the surviving group, coordinated efforts based on each person's demonstrated strengths. Chen takes point on anything technical. Williams handles heavy lifting. Johnson navigates. We move as a unit or we don't move at all. Morrison observed this natural leadership dynamic with professional fascination. Traditional military hierarchy had been replaced by competency-based organization, with Sarah's analytical skills earning her tactical authority despite her civilian status and physical size. It represented exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that modern special operations required. The rope traverse over a water obstacle became Sarah's moment of individual triumph. Her modified rope techniques and superior understanding of load distribution allowed her to cross faster than anyone else, then assist teammates who struggled with the challenge. Each successful crossing built momentum and confidence for the group. How did you make that look easy? Williams gasped as Sarah helped him onto the far platform. Physics, Sarah replied, securing her rope for the next crosser. Distribute your weight evenly, maintain 3 points of contact, and trust the equipment to do its job. The log carry segment traditionally broke down team coordination as exhaustion overwhelmed communication. Sarah's boat crew experience proved invaluable as she applied lessons learned during the winning race to this new challenge. Her crew moved their log with mechanical precision while other teams struggled with basic coordination. Morrison found himself timing Sarah's individual performance against established standards for male trainees. Her scores weren't just competitive, they were exceptional. More importantly, her leadership was elevating everyone else's performance, creating a force multiplication effect that impressed veteran instructors. The final obstacle was a rappelling tower that required trainees to overcome their fear of heights while managing equipment with exhausted hands and compromised judgment. Sarah's rope modifications proved crucial here as well, providing better control during descent and reducing the risk of accidents when reaction times were compromised. As she completed her rappel and landed safely, Sarah looked up at teammates still descending and realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving Hell Week. She was dominating it. The challenges that had seemed impossibly difficult 5 days earlier now felt manageable, even routine. Morrison approached as Sarah coiled her modified rope with practiced efficiency. Outstanding performance, Chen. Your rope work has been exemplary throughout. Thank you, Master Chief. My father always said that good equipment properly employed was half the battle won. Morrison nodded, recognizing wisdom that transcended military traditions. Your father taught you well. That rope work demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need in modern operators. The obstacle course completion left Sarah feeling transformed rather than merely exhausted. She'd proven to herself and everyone watching that determination combined with intelligence could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. More importantly, She demonstrated that different approaches to traditional problems could yield superior results. As the remaining 8 trainees gathered for final evaluation, Sarah realized that Hell Week's true purpose hadn't been breaking them down. It had been revealing who they really were when everything else was stripped away. Saturday night brought the final test that had ended more Hell Week dreams than any other. Solo night navigation through hostile terrain with nothing but a compass, map, and the accumulated wisdom of 5 days in hell. Each remaining trainee would navigate alone through 15 miles of treacherous coastal wilderness, reaching designated checkpoints while avoiding instructor patrols designed to simulate enemy contact. Sarah's father's compass, a Korean War-era instrument that had guided him through combat in Afghanistan, rested in her palm like a talisman of inherited courage. The brass casing was worn smooth by decades of use, its needle pointing true north with the reliability that had kept her father alive through multiple deployments. Morrison briefed the final 8 survivors in the pre-dawn darkness, his voice carrying unusual gravity. This navigation exercise represents your final examination. You'll move independently through terrain designed to test everything you've learned about land navigation, tactical movement, and mental resilience. Some of you will complete the course within the time standard. Others will discover that even the strongest can lose their way in the darkness. The route covered coastal mountains, dense forest, and rocky shoreline where one wrong step could result in serious injury. Hidden throughout the course, instructor teams waited with night vision equipment and tactical knowledge that made avoiding detection nearly impossible for exhausted trainees operating at the edge of human endurance. Sarah began her navigation with methodical precision, using her father's compass and techniques he'd taught her during childhood camping trips that now seemed like military training disguised as family time. Every bearing she shot, every landmark she identified, every route decision reflected lessons learned at her father's side. The first checkpoint lay 8 miles northeast through terrain that offered multiple route options. Sarah chose the longer but safer path that avoided the most obvious approaches, reasoning that instructor patrols would concentrate on routes that tired trainees might select for convenience rather than tactical soundness. Her navigation proved flawless. While other trainees struggled with basic compass work and map reading, Sarah moved through the darkness with confidence born of extensive preparation and inherited skill. Each checkpoint was reached ahead of schedule. Each route selection demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed monitoring instructors. Morrison tracked the trainees' progress from the command post, watching GPS indicators that showed their positions without revealing whether they were successfully avoiding patrol contact. Sarah's dot moved across the digital map with purposeful precision that stood out among the wandering paths of other participants. "She's running a perfect course," Lieutenant Commander Brooks observed, studying the tracking data. "Look at her timing. She's averaging better than required pace while maintaining tactical movement principles." Morrison nodded, though his attention was focused on Sarah's route selections rather than her speed. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of tactical thinking that separated competent operators from truly exceptional ones. Every path she chose showed consideration of terrain advantages, concealment opportunities, and escape routes if things went wrong. The halfway point brought Sarah's most dangerous challenge, crossing an exposed ridge where instructor patrols maintained overlapping fields of observation. Standard doctrine suggested waiting for cloud cover or finding an alternative route, but Sarah's timing analysis indicated that delay would cost her the ability to complete the course within required standards. Instead, she chose a third option that demonstrated creative tactical thinking. Using terrain features her father had taught her to identify, Sarah found a narrow ravine that provided concealed movement directly through the patrol zone. The route required technical climbing skills and absolute silence, but it allowed her to maintain schedule while avoiding detection. Morrison watched the GPS track with growing amazement as Sarah's indicator moved through what appeared to be impossible terrain. "How is she moving through that section? There's no marked trail in that area." Technical review of the route later revealed Sarah's innovation. She'd identified and exploited a natural feature that didn't appear on standard topographic maps but provided exactly the concealment needed for undetected movement. Her navigation represented exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that modern special operations required. The final checkpoint lay 3 miles southwest, reachable by a coastal route that offered speed at the cost of exposure. or an inland path that provided concealment but required additional time and energy. Sarah chose a hybrid approach that utilized both routes strategically, moving fast where terrain provided natural concealment and accepting exposure only when necessary to maintain schedule. She reached the final checkpoint 47 minutes ahead of schedule, becoming the first trainee in Morrison's memory to complete the night navigation course early while avoiding all patrol contact. Her performance represented not just individual excellence but mastery of skills that couldn't be taught through standard instruction. As Sarah emerged from the wilderness and reported to the extraction point, she carried more than her father's compass. She carried proof that preparation, intelligence, and determination could overcome any challenge when properly applied. Sunday morning brought an unexpected crisis that threatened to end Sarah's Hell Week journey mere hours before completion. During the final physical fitness assessment, a required test to demonstrate that trainees retained functional capability after 5 days of systematic punishment, Sarah collapsed during the running portion and couldn't immediately regain her footing. The emergency medical tag attached to her gear became the focus of intense discussion among medical personnel and instructors. Protocol dictated immediate evaluation for any trainee showing signs of serious distress, and Sarah's collapse triggered automatic medical review that could result in mandatory withdrawal regardless of her wishes to continue. Morrison arrived at the medical station as corpsmen evaluated Sarah's condition. She sat on an examination table, conscious and alert but clearly struggling with the accumulated damage of Hell Week. Her hands trembled slightly, her breathing was labored, and her skin showed the pale complexion of someone operating beyond normal physical limits. "What's her status?" Morrison asked the senior corpsman. "Severe dehydration, muscle fatigue consistent with extreme exertion, and early signs of exhaustion syndrome," came the clinical response. "She's not in immediate danger, but continuing could push her into genuine medical emergency territory." Sarah listened to the evaluation with growing frustration. After surviving 5 days of calculated torture and exceeding every performance standard, her journey might end because her body had finally reached its breaking point. The irony was bitter. She'd outlasted stronger trainees only to be defeated by accumulated damage when victory was within reach. "Ma'am, I have to recommend withdrawal," the corpsman continued. "You've pushed your body beyond safe limits, and continuing could result in serious injury or medical emergency." Sarah's response came through gritted teeth. "Corpsman, what are the minimum medical standards for continuation?" "Not recommendations, requirements." The medical evaluation revealed that while Sarah was severely stressed, she remained within acceptable parameters for conscious decision-making about her own continuation. Her vital signs, though concerning, weren't at levels that mandated forced withdrawal. The decision remained hers to make. Morrison found himself in an uncomfortable position. Professional responsibility suggested supporting medical recommendations for Sarah's safety. Personal investment in her success made him want to advocate for her continuation. The conflict between duty and desire created moral complexity he hadn't anticipated when making his original bet. "Chen," Morrison said quietly, "you've already proven everything you set out to prove. Nobody would question your courage or capability if you accept medical advice and withdraw now." Sarah looked at him with eyes that burned with determination despite her physical exhaustion. "Master Chief, with respect, I didn't come this far to quit 3 hours before the finish line. If medical says I can continue, then I'm continuing." The corpsman attached the emergency medical tag to her gear as a precautionary measure, indicating elevated monitoring requirements but not mandatory withdrawal. The tag became a symbol of Sarah's refusal to surrender even when her body was betraying her will to continue. "If you collapse again, we're pulling you immediately," the corpsman warned. "No discussion, no appeal. You'll have proven your point, but we won't risk serious injury for the sake of completion." Sarah nodded understanding while privately vowing that collapse wasn't an option. She'd watched her father fight through injuries and exhaustion during his military service, drawing strength from sources deeper than physical capability when mission success demanded sacrifice. Morrison walked with Sarah toward the final assembly area where remaining trainees prepared for Hell Week's concluding ceremony. Her movements were careful and deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining military bearing that refused to acknowledge weakness. "Why is this so important to you?" Morrison asked, genuinely curious about motivations that transcended normal competitive drive. Sarah was quiet for several steps before responding. Master Chief, my father died believing that warriors were defined by their refusal to quit when quitting was the rational choice. Everything he taught me about courage and honor came down to that simple principle. If I quit now, when I'm so close to proving that his lessons created something worthwhile, then I dishonor everything he stood for. Morrison understood. Sarah wasn't just completing Hell Week. She was honoring her father's memory and validating his legacy through her own achievement. The medical emergency had revealed the deeper motivation driving her determination. Not personal glory, but filial devotion expressed through military excellence. As they reached the final assembly area, Morrison realized that regardless of whether Sarah completed the remaining exercises, she'd already achieved something more valuable than program completion. She demonstrated that courage took many forms, and that the most powerful motivation often came from love rather than anger, honor rather than pride. Sunday afternoon brought Morrison to his quarters where he sat at his desk, composing the most difficult letter he'd written in 30 years of military service. The recipient was his own daughter, Rebecca, a college sophomore who'd never shown interest in military life but deserved to understand how profoundly his perspective had changed over the past 5 days. The letter began with uncharacteristic introspection. Rebecca, I'm writing to tell you about a young woman who has taught me more about strength and capability than 3 decades of military experience. Her name is Sarah Chen, and she's currently completing something I believed impossible when this week began. Morrison paused, considering how to explain his transformation to a daughter who knew him only as the inflexible military man who'd raised her with rigid discipline and traditional expectations. Rebecca had often challenged his views about women's roles, conversations that had ended in frustration when Morrison's military mindset clashed with her generation's more progressive attitudes. The letter continued, when Sarah arrived for Hell Week training, I made a bet that she couldn't survive 48 hours of the program. My assumption was based on 30 years of experience training elite warriors, combined with prejudices I didn't even recognize I carried. I was completely wrong, and being wrong has taught me something valuable about the difference between tradition and truth. Morrison's handwriting reflected the careful consideration he was giving to each word. This letter represented more than communication with his daughter. It was confession of personal growth that had challenged fundamental aspects of his identity. Sarah's approach to military challenges is different from what I've traditionally valued, but her results speak for themselves. Where I emphasized individual toughness, she demonstrates team effectiveness. Where I valued aggressive dominance, she shows intelligent adaptation. She's completing Hell Week not by becoming a man, but by proving that different strengths can achieve the same objectives. The most difficult paragraph came next, where Morrison acknowledged his own limitations. I realize now that my rigid thinking about what makes a warrior may have blinded me to capabilities that don't fit traditional molds. Modern warfare requires operators who can think strategically while performing physically, who can lead through competence rather than intimidation, and who can adapt tactics to changing circumstances rather than simply applying overwhelming force. Morrison remembered conversations with Rebecca where she'd accused him of being stuck in outdated thinking, unable to see women as capable of anything beyond traditional support roles. At the time, he'd dismissed her criticism as youthful idealism uninformed by military reality. Now he understood that her perspective had been more accurate than his experience. Watching Sarah succeed has made me proud in an unexpected way, the letter continued. Not just proud of her achievement, but proud that military training can evolve to recognize excellence regardless of its source. She's not changing to fit our standards. She's proving that our standards were incomplete. The letter's conclusion reflected Morrison's desire to repair relationship damage caused by his previous inflexibility. Rebecca, I know our conversations about women's capabilities have been frustrating for you. I dismissed your views as uninformed idealism, when they were actually informed insight that my prejudices prevented me from recognizing. Sarah Chen has proven that you were right about potential being limited by opportunity rather than inherent capability. Morrison signed the letter and sealed it in an envelope, knowing that sending it would represent a fundamental shift in his relationship with his daughter. For years, he'd maintained authority through certainty and traditional military hierarchy. This letter acknowledged uncertainty and requested understanding rather than demanding respect. The broader implications of his transformation extended beyond personal relationships. As a senior instructor responsible for training future special operations personnel, Morrison's evolved perspective would influence how the military evaluated and developed talent. Sarah's success suggested that diversity in approaches and backgrounds might strengthen rather than weaken elite units. His final entry in his personal war diary reflected this understanding. Sarah Chen will complete Hell Week this evening, finishing 2 days ahead of schedule and demonstrating capabilities that have redefined my understanding of warrior potential. More importantly, her success has forced me to confront and overcome prejudices that were limiting my effectiveness as an instructor and as a person. Morrison sealed the diary and prepared for Hell Week's concluding ceremony, knowing that regardless of what happened in the final hours, Sarah Chen had already achieved victory. She'd not only proven her own capabilities but had transformed the man who'd bet against her success, creating ripple effects that would influence military training long after her individual achievement became military history. The letter to Rebecca would be mailed that evening, carrying with it Morrison's hope that admitting error could strengthen relationships and that growth was possible at any age when proper motivation aligned with willingness to change. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of 5 days pressing down on the 6 remaining trainees like accumulated gravity. Hell Week's final push traditionally claimed its last casualties during these concluding hours, when exhausted minds convinced battered bodies that they'd already proven enough and could quit with honor intact. Sarah's torn and bloodied BDU shirt had become a roadmap of her journey through Hell Week's gauntlet. Salt stains marked where sweat had dried during endless physical trials. Tears in the fabric showed where obstacles had extracted their price in skin and determination. Blood spots recorded moments when Will had overcome physical limitations through pure stubborn refusal to surrender. The final challenge was deceptively simple in concept but devastating in execution. A 12-hour endurance test combining every element Hell Week had introduced, compressed into a single continuous ordeal that would separate those with unbreakable resolve from those who simply thought they possessed it. Morrison gathered the survivors, Sarah, Martinez, Johnson, Williams, Brooks, and Patterson, in the pre-dawn darkness for final instructions. These 6 had endured everything the program could devise, but the most brutal test still lay ahead. Your final examination begins now and ends at 1800 hours, Morrison announced, his voice carrying unusual gravity. 12 hours of continuous challenges designed to test everything you've learned about yourselves over the past 5 days. You'll face surf torture, obstacle courses, team challenges, and individual tests with no rest periods and minimal nutrition. Some of you will complete this final push and earn the right to continue in the program. Others will discover that even extraordinary effort has limits. The first 4 hours combined surf torture with immediate transition to obstacle courses, creating a cycle of hypothermia followed by physical demands that required coordination when bodily control was compromised. Sarah's experience with cold water survival techniques proved invaluable as she managed her body's responses better than teammates who fought against physiological reactions rather than working with them. Her BDU shirt, now more holes than fabric, provided minimal protection against the elements, but Sarah had learned to find warmth through movement and mental focus rather than depending on external insulation. Each challenge became another test of lessons learned and techniques mastered during the previous 5 days. Martinez collapsed during the 6th hour, his body finally succumbing to accumulated damage and sleep deprivation. Medical personnel extracted him immediately, leaving 5 survivors to continue the final push. His departure affected everyone. Martinez had been a steady presence throughout Hell Week, and his absence left a psychological gap that tested the remaining trainees' resolve. 5 left, Williams muttered during a brief transition between challenges. 5 is enough, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the visible strain of extreme exhaustion. We finish together or we don't finish at all. Morrison watched this exchange with professional admiration. Sarah's leadership had evolved throughout Hell Week from quiet competence to active team building, and her commitment to group success demonstrated exactly the kind of selfless dedication that elite units required. The 9th hour brought individual challenges designed to isolate each trainee and force purely personal decisions about continuation. Sarah faced a rope climb that should have been impossible given her exhausted condition, but she attacked the challenge with systematic technique that compensated for diminished strength through superior mechanics. Her modified rope work, refined over 5 days of practical application, allowed her to complete the climb when several male teammates struggled with the same obstacle. The torn shirt that marked her journey provided just enough grip enhancement to maintain purchase on the rope despite hands that trembled from fatigue. Outstanding technique, Chen. The evaluating instructor commented as Sarah completed her descent. Your rope work has been exemplary throughout this program. The final 3 hours tested mental resilience as much as physical capability. Navigation challenges requiring complex calculations, equipment maintenance under time pressure, and tactical problem-solving that demanded clear thinking when exhaustion made concentration nearly impossible. Sarah's engineering background provided advantages during technical challenges, but her real strength lay in methodical approach that broke complex problems into manageable components. While other trainees became overwhelmed by the scope of requirements, Sarah tackled each element systematically until solutions emerged. As 1,700 hours approached and the final 60 minutes began, 5 trainees remained standing. Brooks had collapsed during hour 10, leaving Sarah as the only woman among 4 survivors who represented different paths to the same destination. Absolute refusal to quit when every rational consideration suggested surrender. Morrison realized that regardless of what happened in the final hour, Sarah Chen had already achieved something remarkable. She'd not only survived Hell Week, but had demonstrated leadership, technical competence, and warrior spirit that exceeded his highest expectations for any trainee, male or female, at 1,600 hours on Sunday afternoon. Sarah Chen accomplished something that would be remembered in Naval Special Warfare history for decades to come. She completed Hell Week's final requirements 2 full days ahead of the originally scheduled conclusion, becoming the first trainee in Morrison's 15-year instructing career to finish early while exceeding every performance standard. The official Hell Week completion certificate that Morrison signed bore an unprecedented notation. Completed 48 hours ahead of standard timeline with exemplary performance in all categories. The document would become a historic military record, proof that determination combined with intelligence could redefine what seemed possible under extreme conditions. Morrison stood before the 4 surviving trainees, Sarah, Johnson, Williams, and Patterson, with emotions he struggled to categorize. Pride mixed with humility, professional satisfaction blended with personal transformation, and amazement combined with respect for achievements that had exceeded his most optimistic predictions. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, his voice carrying unusual formality. You have completed Hell Week with distinction. More than that, you have demonstrated capabilities that will influence how we train future special operations personnel. He turned specifically towards Sarah, knowing that this moment required acknowledgement of achievement that transcended normal program completion. Trainee Chen, Morrison continued, when this week began, I made a bet that you couldn't survive 48 hours of Hell Week training. I was not just wrong. I was completely wrong. You have not only completed every requirement, you have finished 2 days early while demonstrating leadership, technical competence, and warrior spirit that exceeds standards we've established over decades of elite training. The base-wide recognition of Sarah's achievement had already begun. Word of her performance had spread through the special operations community with the speed that extraordinary accomplishments always generated. Senior officers who'd never heard of Sarah Chen were requesting detailed reports of her Hell Week performance, curious about training methods that could produce such exceptional results. Morrison publicly acknowledged his lost bet with characteristic directness. I placed a wager against trainee Chen's success based on prejudices and assumptions that her performance has proven completely unfounded. She has won that bet decisively, and in doing so, she has taught me valuable lessons about the evolution of military excellence. The ceremony drew attention from base command, medical personnel, and instructor staff who'd witnessed Sarah's journey from skeptically regarded civilian to proven warrior. Her achievement represented more than individual success. It validated new approaches to military training that emphasized adaptability and intelligence alongside traditional physical toughness. Sarah's quiet satisfaction with proving herself showed in her bearing rather than her words. She stood at attention with military precision that would have made her father proud. accepting recognition not as personal validation but as honor earned through dedication to principles he'd taught her years earlier. "Master Chief," Sarah replied when called upon to speak, "this week has been about more than completing training requirements. It's been about honoring my father's memory and proving that the lessons he taught me about courage and determination created something worthwhile." The media attention that had been building throughout the week intensified as word of Sarah's early completion spread beyond the base. Military journalists, Defense Department officials, and program administrators recognized that her success carried implications far beyond one individual's achievement. Her story would be documented in official reports, case studies, and training manuals that analyzed her methods and results for future application. The combination of engineering background, military family heritage, and personal determination that had driven her success provided a template for identifying and developing similar potential in other candidates. Morrison found himself fielding calls from senior officers who wanted to understand how a civilian contractor's daughter had outperformed career military personnel in the Navy's most demanding training program. His explanations emphasized Sarah's preparation, intelligence, and unbreakable resolve. But he knew the real answer was more complex. Sarah Chen had succeeded because she'd approached Hell Week not as an ordeal to survive but as a problem to solve, applying analytical thinking and adaptive strategies to challenges that traditionally required only brute force endurance. Her methods suggested that modern special operations needed personnel who could think as well as fight, who could lead through competence rather than intimidation. The completion certificate became the first of many documents that would record Sarah's achievement, but it also represented something more significant: proof that military excellence could take forms that challenged traditional expectations while achieving superior results. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah prepared for the next phase of her military journey, Morrison realized that his bet had cost him more than money or pride. It had cost him outdated assumptions that had limited his effectiveness as an instructor, and gaining those insights had been worth every uncomfortable moment of being proven wrong. The Congressional Letter of Recognition arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center 3 weeks after Sarah's Hell Week completion, bearing official seals and signatures that transformed her achievement from military training success into national recognition of barrier-breaking accomplishment. The letter formally acknowledged her as the first civilian participant to complete Hell Week ahead of schedule, while demonstrating leadership that elevated entire training programs. The immediate impact on training protocols was swift and comprehensive. Sarah's methods, her analytical approach to physical challenges, her systematic problem-solving under extreme stress, and her team-focused leadership style were studied by training development specialists who recognized that modern warfare required operators capable of more than traditional military skills. Morrison found himself appointed to a special committee tasked with incorporating lessons learned from Sarah's success into updated training curricula. His transformation from skeptic to advocate made him uniquely qualified to bridge traditional military methods with innovative approaches that Sarah had demonstrated. Her success wasn't an anomaly, Morrison explained to the committee during their initial meeting. It was a preview of what's possible when we select and train personnel based on capability rather than convention. The program expansion that followed Sarah's achievement opened special operations training to qualified candidates regardless of their initial military status. Congressional interest in maximizing return on defense training investments aligned with operational needs for personnel who could adapt to rapidly changing tactical environments. Sarah's story spread throughout the military community with the viral intensity that transformative achievements generated. Female personnel at every level found inspiration in her success, while male service members gained new appreciation for capabilities they'd previously underestimated or ignored entirely. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, who'd originally supported Sarah when Morrison made his dismissive bet, was tasked with documenting the training innovations that had enabled her success. Her report became required reading for special operations instructors throughout the military, establishing new standards for identifying and developing unconventional talent. Chen's achievement demonstrates that elite performance can emerge from unexpected sources when proper selection criteria are applied, Brooks wrote in her analysis. Traditional military background provides valuable foundation, but determination, intelligence, and adaptability may be more predictive of special operations success. The long-term implications for military culture extended far beyond training programs. Sarah's success challenged institutional assumptions about gender roles, civilian versus military capability, and the sources of warrior potential that had remained unquestioned for decades. Morrison's personal evolution from skeptic to advocate became a case study in leadership development, demonstrating how experienced professionals could grow and adapt when confronted with evidence that challenged their fundamental assumptions. His willingness to acknowledge error and embrace new perspectives elevated his reputation rather than diminishing it. Master Chief Morrison's transformation has been as impressive as Trainee Chen's achievement, noted the base commander in his evaluation report. His ability to recognize the limitations of his previous thinking and adapt his instructional methods demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership flexibility that modern military operations require. The ripple effects reached international military communities as allies studied American innovations in special operations training. Sarah's methods were analyzed by foreign militaries seeking to maximize their own elite personnel development, creating diplomatic opportunities for sharing best practices and strengthening defense relationships. Sarah's decision about her military future carried weight far beyond personal career choices. Defense Department officials recognized that her continued service would provide ongoing opportunities to refine and validate the training innovations her success had inspired, while her departure would represent lost institutional knowledge that couldn't easily be replaced. The media attention surrounding her achievement created public awareness of military training evolution that had previously remained within professional circles. Her story became a recruitment tool for attracting high-quality candidates who might not have considered military service under traditional paradigms but were inspired by evidence that excellence was recognized regardless of its source. Morrison's changed perspective influenced every aspect of his instructional approach. He began identifying and nurturing potential in candidates who might have been overlooked under previous evaluation criteria, creating a new generation of special operations personnel whose diverse backgrounds strengthened rather than weakened unit effectiveness. "I spent 15 years training warriors according to one model," Morrison reflected during a training conference presentation. "Sarah Chen taught me that there are multiple paths to warrior excellence, and my job is to recognize and develop that potential wherever it appears." The congressional recognition represented more than acknowledgement of individual achievement. It validated institutional change that was reshaping how the military identified, trained, and employed its most elite personnel. Sarah's success had proven that evolution in military thinking could strengthen rather than compromise operational effectiveness. 6 months after Hell Week, Morrison and Sarah found themselves collaborating on something neither had anticipated during those brutal 5 days: a comprehensive training manual that would reshape special operations preparation for future generations. The document they were creating represented more than updated procedures. It was a fusion of traditional military wisdom with innovative approaches that Sarah's success had validated. The new training manual bore both their names as co-authors, a partnership that symbolized the evolution from adversarial relationship to mutual respect. Morrison's 3 decades of instructional experience provided the foundation, while Sarah's analytical perspective and unconventional methods offered revolutionary improvements to established practices. Chapter 7 needs revision, Sarah suggested during one of their weekly collaboration sessions. The rope work section should emphasize mechanical advantage rather than just upper body strength. My modifications didn't make the climbs easier, they made them more efficient. Morrison nodded, his acceptance of Sarah's expertise representing a personal transformation that continued months after her Hell Week completion. Include the physics behind your knot selections. Future instructors need to understand why your methods work, not just how to implement them. Their professional relationship had developed into something unprecedented in Morrison's career: genuine intellectual partnership with someone whose achievements had exceeded his own in several key areas. Sarah's engineering background provided analytical frameworks that enhanced rather than replaced traditional military training methods. The manual's introduction, written jointly, explained their collaborative approach. Effective special operations training must combine time-tested principles with adaptive innovation. Excellence emerges when traditional military discipline meets analytical problem-solving, creating operators capable of succeeding in environments that require both physical toughness and intellectual flexibility. Sarah's decision about her military future had surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of pursuing immediate active duty assignment, she chose to remain at the Naval Special Warfare Center as a civilian instructor. working alongside Morrison to implement the training innovations her success had inspired. I realized that my greatest contribution might be helping other people discover their own potential, Sarah explained to Morrison during one of their planning sessions. Hell Week taught me about my capabilities, but working with you has taught me about developing capabilities in others. The instructor role allowed Sarah to continue honoring her father's memory while building something constructive from her achievement. Each new class of trainees benefited from methods she'd pioneered, creating a multiplier effect that extended her influence far beyond individual accomplishment. Morrison's continued success as an instructor was enhanced rather than diminished by his partnership with Sarah. His willingness to learn from someone he'd initially dismissed demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive leadership that modern military operations required, earning him recognition as a model for professional development throughout the special operations community. Master Chief Morrison has shown that experience combined with openness to new ideas creates more effective instruction than either quality alone, noted his performance evaluation. His collaboration with civilian instructor Chen has produced training innovations that are being adopted service-wide. The impact on other women considering military service was immediate and substantial. Sarah's story provided concrete proof that determination and preparation could overcome institutional barriers, inspiring a new generation of female candidates to pursue elite military training that had previously seemed inaccessible. Morrison's changed perspective influenced his evaluation of every trainee, male and female. He began recognizing potential in candidates who might have been overlooked under his previous assessment criteria, creating opportunities for excellence to emerge from unexpected sources. I spent years looking for one type of warrior, Morrison reflected during a training conference presentation. Sarah taught me that warrior excellence takes many forms, and my job is to recognize and develop that potential wherever it appears. The training manual they were creating together represented more than updated procedures. It was a philosophical statement about the evolution of military training. Their collaboration demonstrated that the best results emerged when traditional experience partnered with innovative thinking, creating synergy that exceeded either approach alone. Sarah's influence extended beyond the specific techniques she'd developed during Hell Week. Her analytical approach to problem-solving, her focus on team effectiveness over individual dominance, and her demonstration that different could be, were reshaping how the entire special operations community thought about excellence. The manual's final chapter, titled Future Directions, outlined their shared vision for military training that combined the best of traditional methods with revolutionary innovations. Their partnership had proven that evolution in military thinking strengthened rather than compromised operational effectiveness, creating a model for continued adaptation that would influence special operations training for decades to come. As they worked together on the document that would preserve and extend the lessons of her Hell Week success, both Morrison and Sarah understood that their collaboration represented something historically significant. Proof that military excellence could evolve without losing its essential character. 2 years after her Hell Week triumph, Sarah Chen stood at attention in dress blues as Morrison prepared to pin the Navy SEAL trident on her uniform, a moment that represented the full circle of her journey from dismissed civilian to elite warrior. The ceremony took place at the same Naval Special Warfare Center where Morrison had once bet she couldn't survive 48 hours of training. The SEAL trident itself carried profound symbolic weight. The golden eagle represented the Navy. The anchor symbolized maritime heritage, the trident indicated Neptune's power, and the pistol represented combat readiness. For Sarah, receiving this pin meant acceptance into a brotherhood that had seemed impossible to enter when she'd first faced Morrison's skepticism. Sarah's path to this moment had included 18 months of additional specialized training following her Hell Week completion. Advanced combat skills, underwater operations, parachuting, weapons expertise, and tactical leadership. Every requirement for SEAL qualification had been met with the same analytical excellence she demonstrated during those first 5 brutal days. Morrison's role in the pinning ceremony carried special significance. The man who'd bet against her success now stood as her primary advocate, having requested the honor of presenting her trident as recognition of the mutual transformation their relationship had undergone. Sarah Chen, Morrison announced to the gathered assembly, "You have completed every requirement for Navy SEAL qualification with distinction. More importantly, You have demonstrated that excellence in special operations can take forms we hadn't previously recognized or fully appreciated. The audience included base command personnel, fellow SEAL graduates, and family members who'd supported Sarah's unconventional military journey. Her mother and younger brother had flown from California to witness this culmination of years of preparation and sacrifice. As Morrison pinned the trident to Sarah's uniform, he spoke words that carried personal weight beyond their ceremonial function. This pin represents more than individual achievement. It represents the evolution of our understanding about what defines warrior excellence in modern military operations. Sarah's response reflected the grace and humility that had characterized her entire military journey. Master Chief, receiving this trident is an honor I share with everyone who believed in my potential when I couldn't see it myself. My father taught me that warriors are defined not by their physical strength, but by their refusal to quit when quitting seems reasonable. The ceremony's broader significance wasn't lost on military officials who recognized Sarah's graduation as validation of training innovations that were being implemented throughout special operations programs. Her success had proven that diversity in backgrounds and approaches strengthened rather than weakened elite units. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, now promoted to commander, served as the ceremony's reviewing officer. Her remarks emphasized the institutional changes that Sarah's achievement had inspired. Petty Officer Chen's success has demonstrated that our most elite units benefit from personnel who bring different perspectives and capabilities to traditional military challenges. Sarah's graduation speech reflected the leadership qualities that had emerged during her Hell Week experience and continued developing throughout her advanced training. Special operations success requires more than individual excellence. It requires team members who can adapt, innovate, and support each other when conventional approaches prove insufficient. Morrison's pride in presenting Sarah's trident was evident to everyone present. His transformation from skeptic to mentor represented personal growth that had enhanced his effectiveness as an instructor and earned him recognition throughout the special operations community. 2 years ago, I made a bet that Sarah couldn't survive Hell Week, Morrison told the audience. I was wrong about her capabilities, but more importantly, I was wrong about the nature of warrior potential itself. She has taught me that excellence can emerge from sources we hadn't considered when we limited our thinking to traditional models. The pinning ceremony marked not just Sarah's individual achievement, but the completion of a relationship arc that had transformed both participants. Morrison had evolved from rigid traditionalist to adaptive innovator, while Sarah had grown from determined civilian to proven special operations professional. Sarah's family watched with emotions that mixed pride with amazement at how far their daughter had traveled from her engineering student origins. Her mother later commented that the ceremony represented fulfillment of potential that her late husband had recognized and nurtured years earlier. The trident pin itself would become Sarah's most treasured possession, representing not just personal accomplishment but validation of her father's belief that determination and preparation could overcome any obstacle. Every time she wore the pin, she would remember both the Hell Week journey that had started her transformation and the man who'd learned to believe in her success. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah took her place among the elite warriors she'd worked so hard to join, Morrison realized that his lost bet had been the best wager of his career, not because of what he'd lost, but because of what they'd both gained through the process of proving him wrong. 5 years after Sarah's Hell Week triumph, Master Chief Morrison stood at the podium during his retirement ceremony, surrounded by 3 decades of accumulated memories and the satisfaction of a career that had evolved far beyond his original expectations. The retirement photo being taken would capture him alongside Sarah and dozens of other graduates whose success had validated his transformed approach to military training. Morrison's retirement speech reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 30 years ago, I thought I understood what made a warrior. I believed excellence came from a single source and took only one form. A young woman named Sarah Chen taught me that warrior potential is limited only by our ability to recognize and develop it. Sarah, now a seasoned SEAL with multiple successful deployments, sat in the front row wearing the dress blues that bore ribbons representing operations she couldn't discuss publicly. Her presence at Morrison's retirement ceremony honored the mentor who'd learned to believe in her success after initially betting against it. The base commander's remarks emphasized Morrison's evolution as an instructor. Master Chief Morrison's greatest achievement wasn't the thousands of warriors he trained according to traditional methods. It was his willingness to recognize when those methods could be improved and his courage to implement changes that strengthened rather than compromised our training standards. Morrison's retirement photo would be displayed in the instructor's building alongside portraits of other legendary trainers. But his image would be unique, the only retirement portrait to include a female SEAL whose success had fundamentally changed how the military approached elite personnel development. Sarah's continued success in Navy operations had validated every innovation her Hell Week performance had inspired. Her analytical approach to tactical problems, her team-focused leadership style, and her ability to adapt strategies to changing circumstances had proven valuable in real-world operations that tested everything Hell Week had attempted to measure. The impact on military training philosophy had been profound and lasting. Programs throughout the special operations community now incorporated analytical thinking alongside physical conditioning, tactical innovation alongside traditional discipline, and diverse leadership styles alongside conventional military hierarchy. Morrison's influence as an instructor had been multiplied through his willingness to learn from Sarah's success. Every trainee who'd benefited from updated methods, every instructor who'd adopted innovative approaches, and every unit that had been strengthened by diverse personnel represented extensions of the transformation that had begun with the dismissed bet. The lasting friendship between former adversaries had become a model for professional relationships throughout the military. Their collaboration demonstrated that the best results emerged when experience partnered with innovation, creating synergy that exceeded either approach alone. Master Chief Morrison taught me that growth requires courage, Sarah said during her remarks at his retirement ceremony. The courage to question assumptions, to admit error, and to embrace change when evidence proves previous thinking was incomplete. Morrison's final thoughts reflected on the unexpected direction his career had taken. I plan to retire as the same instructor I'd been for decades. Instead, I'm retiring as someone who learned that teaching excellence requires remaining open to new definitions of what excellence can look like. The new military culture he'd helped create would continue evolving long after his retirement. Training programs that emphasized adaptability over rigidity, innovation alongside tradition, and diverse approaches to common challenges had become standard throughout special operations communities. Sarah's influence extended beyond her individual service record. Every woman who'd been inspired by her story to pursue elite military training, every man who'd gained new appreciation for different approaches to excellence, and every leader who'd learned to recognize potential in unexpected places represented living extensions of her Hell Week achievement. The retirement photo captured more than the end of one man's career. It documented the transformation of institutional thinking that had strengthened military effectiveness while opening opportunities for excellence to emerge from previously overlooked sources. Morrison's legacy would be measured not just by the warriors he'd trained but by the minds he'd opened, the assumptions he'd challenged, and the innovations he'd implemented after learning that betting against determination and intelligence was always a losing wager. As Morrison prepared for civilian life, he carried with him the satisfaction of a career that had concluded better than it had begun, enhanced by willingness to grow and improved by partnership with someone whose success had exceeded his highest expectations. The friendship between Morrison and Sarah would continue beyond military service, representing proof that the most valuable victories came not from being right but from learning when being wrong created opportunities for unprecedented achievement. Their story had become part of military folklore, inspiring future generations to recognize that courage took many forms and that the strongest warriors were often those who challenged others to expand their understanding of what strength could accomplish.